Today we're going down to Esteli in Nicaragua to speak with Stephen Sefton, and we have an added bonus: attorney, anti-war activist, a whole lot of other stuff. Dan Kovalik, he's been all over the media helping to try to get a handle on the U.S.'s attempt to bring us World War III or IV or whatever we're up to. Whatever it is, it'd be the last one if it breaks the way they're trying to make it. Guys, good to see you and welcome.
Thanks, Don.
Thank you, Don.
Could you sit a little closer together because we're Mr. Stevens' left half here? There you go. All right, so pick it up wherever you'd like to. I know the last thing I worked on yesterday was, we've had, I don't know, millions of people die in Iraq since the United States went in 1991 and again in 2003 because Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. Haven't found him yet, either 19 or 31 years later. And apparently the Russians, about 10 days into Ukraine, the Ukraine, whatever you want to call it this week, they found him. WMD's there, 30 sites with all kinds of hyper-activated, artificially enhanced stuff that'll kill you and anybody you ever met. Maybe we could start with that. I don't know.
Yeah, and by the way, I mean, there's been a reporter that's been reporting on those biological weapons facilities for years. I mean, this has been known, and there was a site, and I forget what U.S. department it was, that actually listed them on a site. They hadn't took them down when the invasion, shortly after the invasion began. And then, of course, Victoria Nuland admitted to the Senate last week that they existed and said they didn't want them in Russian hands. So, I don't think there's a debate about the fact that they exist, right? And as you say, the Iraq war, which was fought half a world away from the U.S., was premised on weapons of mass destruction, which most of us sane people knew didn't exist and clearly don't exist. Meanwhile, the truth is the Russians have found on their border in Ukraine these biological weapons labs. I guess the U.S. would claim they're merely biological, test labs or something. But in any case, what are they doing with 30 biological labs of any kind in Ukraine? It's the most bizarre story. Honestly, this should be a game changer for the narrative of what's happening, right? Yet the U.S. media doesn't seem particularly interested in those labs.
Yeah.
Even though, by the way, and again, this is from a 2018 article by this one reporter, I'm forgetting her name, who's really made it her goal to look into these labs, was saying even back then that and this was before the pandemic, 2018, that they were actually studying coronaviruses there.
Right.
And studying using bats and insects to spread various diseases. So this should be the find of the century. And yet, as far as the Western media is concerned, this is a nothing burger.
Yeah, and it's going to be a very big deal for the UN, I think.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be an acid test for the extent to which they have been co-opted by Western interests, both government and corporate. And so I just found the name of that woman that did that report. Her name is sorry, I've just lost it again. Where did it go? Let's see if we can find it. It's Dilyana Gaitangieva. And there's an article by her or an interview with her on Mint Press News if people want to check that out.
Go ahead.
The US admits to funding biological laboratories in Ukraine. So yeah, can
you spell that for us? Because I know it's a difficult one and I'm not finding it myself on a quick search, and I've seen it the last couple of days also.
So it's Dilyana, Dilyana. That's her name. Gaitangieva, Gaytandzieva, and that's That's currently the lead item on Mint Press News.
Yep. She's a Bulgarian journalist. This is according to Wikispooks.com, who was sacked from her Bulgarian newspaper after writing a story that the CIA was using flights to ship arms to terrorists, which, of course, now everyone knows they were also shipping the actual terrorists, Al-Qaeda and ISIS.
Yeah, and for us in Nicaragua, anybody who's familiar with Nicaraguan history is well aware of the Iran-Contra. So what's new?
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of 30 years old news.
Yeah. So, Dan, we have, it's nice to have a lawyer on with us. This is something about the, the bio labs, to be kind, that I think is significant, and maybe it's a little, I don't know, exotic or esoteric for most people. Maybe you can chime in on it. We've heard, and we're going to hear more, all kinds of denials that, the Russian allegations that were laid out in some detail at the Security Council on Friday by Ambassador Nebenzia, that there were 30 labs, that they were looking at enhanced function of, some very nasty bugs, that the funding was through 2 different military agencies of the United States government, et cetera. And Linda Thomas Wheatfield, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, rather than dealing with the individual allegations, like, well, they said this, but it's not this, it's that, et cetera, like you would do, complaint and answer or counterclaim or whatever, just gave a general denial. It's a lie. The Russians lie. It's fake news, et cetera. And then after he provided more detail, said, I'm not going to give this any more oxygen or any more airtime. In other words, completely avoided confronting the allegations head on. The others, Jen Psaki, and I'm sure we're going to hear from Kirby on Monday and some others, they're making these very flowery denials and counter accusations against the Russians. But Victoria Nuland was under oath in front of a committee, asked a direct question: are there biological weapons in Ukraine? And her answer was, well, there were biological labs. In other words, she admitted the facts of it and left out the words that you'd want to hear if they weren't there, which was like, no, or absolutely not, or any of those terms. But she was under oath. And maybe you could explain just a little bit to people what the difference is between a press conference and testimony under oath in front of Congress.
Well, if you testify under oath before Congress or a court, you are subject to the penalty of perjury. And the penalty of perjury can mean jail time. She could have been put in jail if she lied before the Senate. People have been put in jail when they've lied before Congress. Was it Scooter Libby was one? Mm-hmm. But there were others. So I think, one, you should consider that very reliable testimony because, again, she was doing it under penalty of possible jail time. But also, let's face it, she's also someone who would know the truth about it. Yeah, she was the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine under Obama. Of course, she admitted to helping facilitate the coup in Ukraine in some telephone conversations.
On tape.
Yes, on tape, and she continues to be an important, lead person for Joe Biden in U.S. policy towards Ukraine. So, one, she knows about it, and two, she swore under oath that they existed. I think you can then take it to the bank. And again, if you go online, before these were taken down, there was a U.S. government agency that listed these labs. Before they were taken down, again, around the time of the invasion, people saved screenshots of them. I believe Max Blumenthal has reprinted those. So, again, I think you can take this to the bank, that they existed. Now, what they were doing, we'll see. But they existed, and there has to be a big question. Why did the U.S. have biological labs, even if we don't call them weapons labs, in Ukraine? And I think that the answer to that question is going to be pretty interesting.
Yeah, and I think that there's that very well known video, and I've forgotten where the link might be, of Victoria Newland confirming that, and boasting in fact, that she and her colleagues facilitated $5 billion worth of aid to Ukraine in order precisely to achieve regime change. So, you know, I know obviously a big some portion of that money will have gone to that biological weapons program. So, you know, and in general, and what I don't know what you and Dan think, but what puzzles me is about all this coverage is, what are the United States government and its European Union allies going to do when the Ukrainian forces, the military forces who are already decimated, finally formally have to admit defeat, and Russia then turns its military force towards the west of Ukraine, and you know, who knows what's going to happen at that point? And what are they going to do when all their propaganda that Ukraine is rolling back the Russian invasion, and that heroic Ukrainian civilians are rolling back Russian tanks with their bare hands? Have you seen that story? And what are they going to do when all that turns out to be completely false?
Yeah, well, and the other thing we need to look towards, I mean, again, related to the biological weapons labs, is you're seeing a lot of noise being made, claims that Russia's about to have a chemical weapons attack in Ukraine. And we saw this in Syria, right? Yeah. And clearly, in my view, what one has to look towards is a possible false flag operation to blame the Russians for a chemical weapons attack. There would be no reason for the Russians to do that, just like there was no reason for Assad to do it. And every time it allegedly happened, it was when the UN inspectors were in town or whatever. You know, it made no sense, and it's not going to make sense now. And by the way, I know it has been verboten to use the words false flag because you're a conspiracy theorist, but I think it's okay to now, because the State Department for weeks has been claiming the Russians were going to have a false flag operation. So I think we can start talking about false flags again. And again, I think it's going to be, if it happens, it's going to be these rightist forces in Ukraine that are going to do it.
And of course, the other thing that they're going to have difficulty explaining is is the very substantial and ample testimony of the survivors of the attempts by the Ukrainian Nazi forces and even the not so Nazi forces to use civilians as human shields. Yeah. And that testimony is all going to come out. And again, and I think that's going to be a case for, and it's almost certain that the Russian authorities will set up some kind of war crimes tribunal. And so then you have the issue of how will the Western human rights industry respond to that? You know, but it's a bit like, and although obviously on a much smaller scale, and what we found here in Nicaragua in 2018 is that any testimony, of the abundant testimony about opposition violence here was just completely suppressed by the Western human rights industry. But it'll be much more difficult for them to do that in this much larger and much more terrible, in many ways, conflict in Ukraine. And what are they going to do? How are they going to cover that up?
Well,
go ahead.
Sadly, the media is great at covering these things up, Stephen. I mean, again, I have to emphasize, as we're talking about all this, you know, Yemen is being clobbered as we're talking about this. This is the worst humanitarian crisis on earth that is being created by the Saudis with the help of the UK and the help of the United States, and with cluster bombs sold to the Saudis by the United States. And yet, how much press is that being given? None. Zilcho.
Yeah, and another indictment of the UN, another indictment of the UN system. And as has been Palestine for what, 60 years?
Yes, it's 1947. Yeah, the you have with Yemen, direct U.S. involvement almost on every bombing raid, because the targeting is provided by the United States, whether they use AWACS or their satellites or whatever. And when they use AWACS, which are often, that they don't rent those out. The Saudis can't fly those. They have American, not even NATO pilots, American pilots that fly AWACS. That's their proprietary stuff, their own toys. You can't play with these. So every time you hear about a bombing in Yemen, some Americans were flying a support mission with the bombers.
Yeah, and of course those bombings are happening often. And let's remember that Joe Biden promised at the outset of his presidency he would stop supporting the Saudi campaign against Yemen, and he never lived up to that promise, and he hasn't still.
And it started when he was vice president.
That's right.
Started by Obama did that.
And Obama was given cover by the great humanitarian interventionists like Samantha Power, and Susan Rice and Hillary Clinton. Yeah, I mean, we have to remember this as we hear people coming, like Samantha Power right now, dusting herself off and crying crocodile tears about Ukraine.
Yeah, and it's extraordinary. You get people like Condoleezza Rice appearing on U.S. television saying that it's completely wrong to invade another country. She did.
I know, and it's like they say history repeats itself twice. First is tragedy, then is farce. But this is way beyond farce. It's like, and then it's cartoon or whatever. It's insane what they're selling now.
It's self-caricature.
Yeah.
No, I mean, Orwell couldn't, if he had lived, he couldn't write the fiction, because the fact is much more ridiculous.
I mean, Orwell himself was the most Orwellian figure that you can imagine.
Well, that's true. We'll have to get into that another time, but I agree with you.
But what I'd like to do is maybe get a sense of the landscape there in Latin America and the Caribbean, how they're seeing this thing develop, which of course could envelop the whole world if it goes wrong. And it's not like we have the most competent players sitting on top of the whole thing right now. How do people in Nicaragua, for example, view what's happening in Ukraine?
Well, certainly, the Sandinistas make up around half of the population in terms of political opinion, and they all, I think, without question, support the Russian version of events, under which, and it's obvious that Russia is acting in self-defense and in defense of the republics of Donetsk and Lugansk in the Donbass. So, in terms of popular opinion, and the great majority of opinion supports Russia's position, and is especially after the events of 2018 here, because it's just obvious that the United States can't, you can always tell when US representatives are lying because they open their mouths, And so, sorry, Dan.
No, what you're saying is correct. And, what I'm about to say is not going to be a popular view or endear me to many people in the United States. But, the truth is, I think many people in the East and the developing world feel like this is a counter blow to the West and the U.S. after years and years of attacks against other countries that the U.S. and NATO thought they could just make at will. Iraq and Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, Somalia, the former Yugoslavia. I think this is seen as if this was the Star Wars trilogy, we're in Return of the Jedi at this point.
Yeah, and I think overall, and if you look at the region overall, there's some pseudo-progressive, pseudo-radical writers, and people like Ignacio Ranonet, for example, put great store by practically totally symbolic vote in the UN General Assembly. But what they leave out, I mean, it looks like a large number of countries voted against the Russian position. But what they leave out is that the 35 countries that abstained and the 8 or 9 or 10 countries that didn't even take part of the vote represent by far the vast majority of the world's population. And so, and if you look at that vote, you have the vast majority of the world's population, India, China, for example, abstaining. And then subsequently, you have countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, even Turkey, Brazil, countries that did participate in the vote and did condemn, supposedly in that vote, the Russian position, refusing to apply sanctions at the US request. And that's especially significant in the case of Turkey, which is a NATO member.
Right.
So the overall position of the majority world is very, very clearly in support of Russia's version of events and against attempts by the United States and its allies, especially the European Union, to dragoon the majority world into supporting their position. And if you look at the economics of that, and a lot of commentators on Latin America will say, oh, well, Russia doesn't have that much trade, that much commercial exchange with South America and the Caribbean and Central America and the Caribbean, and that China has a great deal more and the United States has a great deal more. But if you look at the things that Latin America buys from Russia, and Brazil, for example, imports 40% of its fertilizer from Russia.
Right.
So whereas the actual volume of trade overall in the region may not amount to much, what they buy are absolutely crucial products for their own economies. And if Brazil has difficulty securing fertilizer, for example, they're not going to be able to continue to engage in their extremely lucrative production of soya for the Chinese market, and ditto Argentina. So and that gives you some idea of the kind of nuances that one has to start looking at when you actually start discussing, well, what is the reaction of the majority world, especially Latin America, Africa, of course, to events in the Ukraine.
There was an interesting Friday also. You had Security Council, all of the BRICS except for some. In each, Brazil, India, China backed up the position, the demand in that for an investigation into the allegations that were made by Russia. And I textualized this properly, and I should have probably. The Security Council meeting that Russia called on Friday for these biolabs is actually necessary in the process to invoke an investigation by the authority under the treaty. The first step to take is to go to the Security Council with it, and then have the Security Council refer it out to this apparatus created under the treaty for investigation. And on this issue, we supported that demand. China supported that demand, and India supported that. So, when you have India, you got about a third to a half of that, just in one spot, and opposed the UK, France, essentially NATO, including Albania, right? And just something that when I was talking with Professor Montero today, look at how things shake out at the General Assembly vote and in general around the world, as a fascist and a white supremacist, which is kind of remarkable. But it's the vote. The people that are siding with the United States or with Russia internationally, it's Europe pretty much siding with the United States, Asia siding with Russia, and then Africa kind of split and Latin America kind of split. And if you look into Africa, Latin America, the countries are independent, have no question about their sovereignty. They're back to Russia or not fighting ones that are colonies in the United States. It's an observation.
Yeah, thanks, Don. I know. Going back to Latin America, I'm here in the region. The countries are being very careful about how they line up, because partly because of the developing relationship of China. I don't know if you saw a recent video, and I think it was a video about, it was an interview with a woman general from the Southern Command. I think her name was General Richardson.
U.S. Southcom, yeah.
Right, and she was talking about how disturbed she was to discover the extent of Chinese the development of Chinese relations in Latin America. It seems to have come as something of a surprise to her, which I find very hard to believe, But that's what she expressed in this hearing about that issue, and they were looking at why are so many countries in Latin America and the Caribbean rejecting the US Build Act. I think there's some legislation that's been produced by the United States to try and encourage countries in Latin America and elsewhere to engage in development relations with the United States. And what concerned General Richardson, apparently, is that so many countries are turning it down, but they're not turning down the offer from China of infrastructure development programs and projects that are, as General Richardson herself pointed out, on a very large scale. You and I have talked frequently about the transcontinental railway from the port of Ilo in the south of Peru, going through Bolivia, across southern Brazil, to the southern Brazilian port of Santos. And there are many other projects, and perhaps not so massive as that one, but very the Nicaraguan canal is, I'm convinced, will happen over the next 5 to 10 years, and these projects are very important for the development of the region's infrastructure.
Well, and can I say something? Stephen and I were just talking about this. I think what the Latin Americans realize when they look back at the last 100 plus years is that the U.S. is engaged in almost no development down here. The only thing they did develop that we agreed on was the Panama Canal, and they didn't do it for the Panamanians, they did it for themselves.
Right.
But they see China building high-speed trains all over the world, building hospitals. They know if they make a deal with the Chinese, they're going to follow through and build something. The U.S. does not create or build anymore, it destroys. And that's even true within the United States anymore.
Actually, they didn't make it for the Panamanians. They turned Colombians into Panamanians for the canal.
Exactly.
Right. And you just have to, and to get an idea, you and I have discussed this so many times, Tom. And if you look at the US role in Argentina and how it's hobbled the country with debt, working hand in glove with Mauricio Macri and the local Argentinian elites. And there have been very serious public protests in Argentina against the latest deal that the Argentinian government has felt necessary to strike with the IMF. And what it basically means is that the IMF is going to continue to have a big say, and every quarter or every periodically every year, they're going to sit down with the Argentinian government and look at how economic policy is developing, and tell the Argentinians what they expect them to do. And that is the US role in the region. The US role in the region is not to develop autonomy, is not to develop sovereign independence. And that is the role of their relationship with these huge Chinese infrastructure development programs. So who are they? You've put this very well in the past. And the US takes...
Basically, the U.S. comes in, points a gun at you, says, grab your stuff and put it in my boat. And the Chinese come down and say, let's do some business together. We'd like to help us both get rich. That are the two models, in essence.
Well, in the last I saw, and maybe, Stephen, you've seen the latest numbers, but the last I saw was that for every dollar the U.S. puts into Latin America, they take about $147 out.
Oh.
It is a completely exploitative relationship.
Yeah.
People can raise questions about, the desirability of some of the Chinese projects. For example, Chinese companies engaging in classic extractive behavior. That criticism that so many pseudo-progressives love to throw at their governments.
Some Russian imperialism. They're modeling the United States. They're not communists anymore, Yeah, that's right. I know.
Right. So, but that's not the decision of people outside those sovereign countries. It's the decision of Venezuela to decide what their relationship is going to be. It's the decision of Cuba to decide and Nicaragua to decide. And that is the fundamental position of in particular, Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela, but also Bolivia, and increasingly, and I think even social democrat and even right-wing governments are insisting on that, and even Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro has insisted that they are not going to apply sanctions just because the US says so. Which is, I see that as quite significant.
He's a right wing, quote unquote. This Trump supported him. They were saying he's a fascist, and he is pretty, far right. But as we've discussed, even where you've had right wing governments in Central America and South America, what has happened in the last 20, 25 years down there? On the ground, there's a constituency for integration, and locally in the region, and standing up to the United States, and they're expecting relations with other countries to benefit the people of that country, or else the government can't stand on its own. In other words, Bolsonaro, in a way, is compelled by a third to a half of the population to do these things, or else he's going to have a problem at home.
Yeah, and also in Brazil, in Bolsonaro's case, there are electoral considerations because Lula is likely to win the elections later this year, and he too is. So Bolsonaro, in a sense, is positioning himself so that Lula can't make so much as much as he might out of defending Brazil's sovereignty. But then, and if you look at the region, there's only one country really at this point, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the only country that is out and out an unquestionable ally of the United States is Colombia.
Right.
And you probably know very well, Don, that recently, I think it was Joe Biden made an announcement that Colombia is there was one other country as well, I've forgotten which one it was, but it was Colombia and another country, who are formal non-NATO country allies.
Well, they are a formal partner of NATO. They are a partner of NATO. Colombia is the only country in this hemisphere outside of Canada, right, in the U.S., that has a formal relationship with NATO, and they are a partner. And in fact, what was it, 2 weekends ago, there was a NATO naval operation off the coast of Colombia, which included a nuclear submarine.
Right. Which is in violation, by the way, of there's the Community of Latin American Caribbean States Declaration of the region as a non-nuclear military zone.
I understand.
So,
Go ahead.
yeah, but and Colombia goes to elections today.
Yes.
For its legislature, and
president.
No, the presidential elections are on May the 29th.
Okay.
So, and in these legislative elections, Don, practically everybody that's concerned about the well-being and the development of the region's peoples are looking to see to what extent the right-wing parties in Colombia lose ground, because that's going to be a crucial measure of whether Colombia can be kind of clawed back by progressive forces in the region, and not become just a kind of, as it has been for the last, 20, 30 years, in effect, a trampoline for the United States military in the region.
I was going to make a cheap shot first that they're some talk of Hunter Biden becoming agricultural minister in Colombia, but the or import export maybe or something. But seriously, I meant to say this before. One of the phenomenon that goes along with this whole U.S. versus China choice that's before all these countries down there as a trading partner, investment partner, etc. With over the past decades, with China's inroads there's actually among the national bourgeoisie business relationships that have been established that are profitable for people, and that also give them some leverage in their relationship with what were formerly their sponsors in the United States. And so when a government like Bolsonaro's government, for example, is making decisions and looking at electoral consequences, it isn't just the vote of the working people in the country and those who who benefit from this or that thing, from China vis-a-vis the United States, but business relationships on the ground where people are making money with Chinese business, and they want to keep doing that.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely clear that the exploitative style of U.S. Commercial relationships in Latin America hasn't changed for over a century, and now you have this new player that's coming along and offering a much better deal, treating countries with respect as equals, and rather than having somebody from the United States snap their fingers and expect everybody to come running or do their bidding. And those days are gone. So you and I have spoken about this so many times, Don. It's not kind of there's been one long struggle for centuries of the impoverished majorities in Latin America and the Caribbean struggling to achieve a decent life, and the ups and downs of that process have, people talk about pink tides and conservative restorations and so on, but actually the fundamental thing is the class struggle that's been engaged in Latin America and the Caribbean for centuries, and we're now moving into a phase in which the Latin American and Caribbean countries are much better placed to defend their independence, to develop people-focused policies. And why is that? Because China and Russia, and I think it's really important that we understand that whatever China's influence in Latin America may be on its own, the fact that it has this strategic alliance with Russia multiplies that effect much more.
I agree with that. We ran over some, but I'm glad we did. And I appreciate both of you coming on, and look forward
Thanks,
to
Don.
Yeah, take it
You
easy.
too, Don.
Yeah. Dan,
Thanks
thank
again, Don.
Thank you.
Talk again soon.